The killer of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey should have been caught. The evidence was there. But within the first hour, a series of catastrophic police blunders ensured the case might never be solved. This is a story of the 5 failures that ruined one of the most infamous child murder cases in American history. The murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey wasn't just a tragedy. It was a catastrophic failure of justice. The evidence was there. The trail was fresh. But a series of shocking police blunders, beginning within the first hour, ensured the person responsible would likely never be caught. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's an expose of the 5 critical failures that allowed a child's killer to remain a ghost to this day. On the morning of December 26, 1996, in the affluent community of Boulder, Colorado, a frantic 911 call shattered the holiday calm. Patsy Ramsey claimed her daughter, JonBenet, had been kidnapped. She found a bizarre, rambling ransom note on the back staircase of their sprawling home. What followed was not a kidnapping investigation, but a descent into chaos. Hours later, JonBenet's body would be found not by police, but by her own father in their own basement. She had been strangled and had suffered a severe skull fracture. The central paradox of the case was established. A child reported kidnapped is found murdered in her own home. But the real story, the one that explains why we are still asking who did it, decades later, is not about a brilliant killer. It's about a flawed investigation, doomed from the start, like a house built on a faulty foundation. The entire case was destined to crumble. We will break down the 5 unforgivable failures of the Boulder Police Department. Mistakes so fundamental they contaminated the evidence, warped the narrative, and created a perfect storm for a killer to vanish. When the first officer arrived at 755 15th Street in Boulder, the call was for a kidnapping. Standard procedure dictates that even in a kidnapping, the home is a potential crime scene. It must be secured immediately. It's like putting a glass dome over a delicate butterfly. You don't touch, you just preserve. It's the first rule in any investigator's handbook, and it's the very first rule the Boulder Police Department broke. Instead of sealing the house and isolating the Ramseys, the first responding officer allowed the home to become a social gathering. John and Patsy called friends and family. Soon, the house was filled with people offering support. They walked through the hallways, used the bathrooms, and most disastrously, began tidying up. One of Patsy's friends, in a well-intentioned but forensically catastrophic act, went into the kitchen and began cleaning. Imagine trying to find a single set of footprints after a crowd has trampled through fresh snow. Fingerprints, trace evidence, fibers from an intruder, all potentially wiped away before they could be found. The contamination wasn't just limited to the main living areas. Initially, police only cordoned off JonBenet's bedroom, working under the flawed assumption she had been taken from there. The rest of the house, including the basement where her body would later be found, was left open. This meant that for over 7 hours, more than a dozen people could have unknowingly walked past the very room where JonBenet lay dead, destroying or leaving their own traces. This failure had 2 devastating consequences. First, it made distinguishing evidence from daily life impossible. It's like trying to bake a cake when a dozen people have thrown random ingredients into the bowl. When forensic teams eventually did their sweep, the scene was so compromised that any foreign DNA or fingerprints could be attributed to any number of innocent people. As a former Boulder DA would later state, the crime scene was so compromised that the evidence wasn't in a state where you could really say anything definitively. Second, it created a fog of suspicion that would settle over the Ramsey family. Because the scene was not secured, investigators could never rule out that the family or their friends had altered evidence. This initial failure didn't just lose evidence. It created an environment of doubt that would poison every subsequent step of the investigation. A pristine crime scene is a clear story. The Ramsey crime scene was a chaotic mess, and from that chaos, the killer found their first and most crucial escape route. In any homicide case, investigators have 2 basic paths. It was an insider or it was an outsider. A competent investigation explores both roads at the same time. The Boulder Police Department, however, almost immediately picked a lane and refused to look at any other map. Faced with a bizarre crime scene, they developed a powerful case of tunnel vision, focusing almost exclusively on John and Patsy Ramsey. This premature focus had profound procedural consequences. While the Ramseys did give hair, blood, and handwriting samples shortly after the murder, the most glaring blunder was the staggering delay in formally interviewing them. John and Patsy Ramsey were not formally interrogated by police until late April 1997, a full 4 months after their daughter was murdered. Let that sink in. 4 months. An investigator needs to capture a witness's memory when it's a crystal-clear photograph, taken moments after an event. Waiting 4 months is like letting that photograph fade in the sun until the details are blurry and washed out. Separating and interviewing key witnesses immediately is paramount to locking accounts before they can confer. The Boulder PD failed to do this. While the Ramseys were in shock and had lawyered up, the department's inability to secure these interviews for months stands as one of the investigation's biggest blunders. This delay gave the Ramseys, whether innocent or guilty, an enormous advantage. It allowed them time to process, speak with lawyers, and prepare. If they were innocent, it allowed their memories to become clouded. If they were involved, it gave them an invaluable opportunity to coordinate their stories. When they finally did sit down for formal interviews, the spontaneity was gone. The moment for a raw breakthrough had passed. This tunnel vision manifested in other ways. The police department, which even its former chief admitted was inexperienced with homicide, was slow to accept help from seasoned agencies like the FBI. There was a sense that they had their suspects and just needed to build the case. This meant that leads pointing away from the family were not pursued with the same vigor. The intruder theory was treated as a distraction. This created a vicious cycle. The police's focus made the Ramseys more defensive, and their defensiveness made the police more suspicious. By deciding so early who was responsible, the Boulder police stopped investigating a mystery and started trying to prove a theory. It cost them their most valuable resource, time. In any murder investigation, some pieces of evidence are sacred. They are the artifacts that hold the most potential to tell the story. In this case, there were two, the ransom note and JonBenet's body. The way the Boulder police handled both was an act of investigative malpractice. Let's start with the ransom note. It was bizarre. At 2.5 pages, it was incredibly long. It was written on a notepad from inside the Ramsey home, with a pen that also belonged to the family. Experts estimated it took over 20 minutes to write, an audacious risk for an outsider. It was a behavioral fingerprint screaming, staged, like a terrible actor forgetting their lines in the middle of a play. Yet, for a crucial period, the police appear to take it at face value, treating the situation as a legitimate kidnapping, which contributed to the chaos of the unsecured crime scene. Then there was the handling of JonBenet's body. For hours, JonBenet remained undiscovered in a small basement room. It wasn't a police officer who found her. It was her father, John. Around 1 p.m., a detective asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house for anything amiss. This was a staggering decision. Civilians should never be directed to search an active crime scene. John went to the basement, opened a latched door an officer had overlooked, and found his daughter. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. In a moment of pure, understandable horror, John Ramsey picked up his daughter's body and carried her upstairs, laid her on the floor and removing the duct tape. From an evidentiary standpoint, this was like ripping a critical page out of a book and setting it on fire before anyone had a chance to read it. Moving the body disturbed the primary crime scene. Removing the duct tape compromised a key piece of forensic material. The blame here does not lie with a grieving parent. It lies with the police on the scene, who created the situation. The place where JonBenet died and her body itself were both contaminated before a proper forensic examination could even begin. While the Boulder Police Department was building its case against the Ramseys, another theory was fighting for air, the intruder theory. This wasn't just a wild guess. It was supported by physical evidence. But due to the department's tunnel vision, these clues were either downplayed or not pursued with the urgency they demanded. The most prominent piece of evidence suggesting an intruder was a broken basement window. A suitcase was placed below it, and the grate covering it had been disturbed. However, investigators noted an apparently undisturbed spider web on the grate, suggesting it hadn't been moved. The evidence was contradictory and required careful investigation that it arguably never got. But other clues pointed outward. An unidentified boot print was reportedly found in the basement room where JonBenet's body was discovered. More significantly, there was DNA. Trace amounts of male DNA were found on JonBenet's clothing, including in a bloodstain on her underwear. That did not belong to anyone in the Ramsey family. This profile, belonging to unknown male 1, was a tantalizing clue. An objective investigation would have treated this DNA like a giant neon sign pointing toward a suspect. Instead, because it didn't fit the family involvement theory, it was treated as an anomaly. Police suggested it was contamination or innocent transfer. While possible, finding the same unknown DNA profile on multiple items should have been a 5-alarm fire. It was like finding a single unexplained muddy footprint in a sealed, sterile room. You don't ignore it. You figure out who it belongs to. The department's lack of enthusiasm for the intruder theory was palpable. Lou Smith, a veteran homicide detective who came out of retirement to work on the case, became the theory's biggest champion. He clashed with the Boulder PD, believing they were ignoring credible leads. The department's resistance was a symptom of their entrenched tunnel vision. By not giving the intruder leads the same weight as the investigation into the parents, they effectively shut down a major avenue of inquiry. A good investigation is a hunt for the truth. By downplaying the intruder theory, the Boulder police were ignoring the possibility they were wrong. The final nail in the coffin of this investigation was a toxic combination of institutional dysfunction and misguided attempt to close a book that was far from finished. The investigation was crippled by bitter infighting between the Boulder Police Department and the Boulder District Attorney's Office. From early on, the two agencies were at war. The Boulder police, convinced of the Ramseys' guilt, felt the DA's office, led by Alex Hunter, was soft on the family. The DA's office saw the police investigation as flawed. Information wasn't shared freely. Strategies weren't coordinated. This chaos climaxed in 1999, when a grand jury voted to indict the Ramseys, only for DA Alex Hunter to refuse to sign, believing there was insufficient evidence to win in court. Years passed. Then, in 2008, came the bombshell. The new Boulder County District Attorney, Mary Lacey, sent a public letter to John Ramsey formally exonerating the family. The reason? New touch DNA testing had found the same unknown male 1 profile on JonBenet's long johns. In her letter, Lacey declared the family was under no suspicion. On the surface, it looked like a breakthrough, but to many experts, it was a disaster. The exoneration was based on touch DNA. Explaining touch DNA is like this. Everyone shed skin cells, leaving traces everywhere. Finding touch DNA is like finding dust in a room. It proves someone was there, but it doesn't tell you who, when, or what they did. Given how many people had walked to the Ramsey house, relying on this to completely clear suspects was a massive leap. Lacey's successor, Stan Garnett, was appalled, calling the exoneration misleading. Scientists who performed the tests had reportedly warned against such a conclusive interpretation. The damage was immediate. By officially clearing the Ramseys, Lacey effectively ended any serious investigation into their potential involvement. It created a public perception that the case was all but solved, that police just needed to find a man who matched the DNA. But the DNA was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. It was a final, tragic failure. The first was contaminating the physical evidence. The last was contaminating the very possibility of future inquiry. The killer, whoever they were, had been given the ultimate gift, a case closed in name only. These 5 failures created a perfect storm of confusion, contamination, and incompetence. From the first hour to the final, misguided exoneration, the path to justice was systematically destroyed. Let me know in the comments which police error you think was the most damaging to the JonBenet Ramsey case. The story of the JonBenet Ramsey case is one of compounding errors. It began with a trampled crime scene, like try read a story after the pages have been shuffled and stained. It was followed by a crippling tunnel vision that let memories fade like old photographs. Key evidence, like the bizarre ransom note and victim's own body, was mishandled, like tearing pages from the book of the crime itself. Leads pointing to an intruder were ignored in favor of a preferred narrative. And finally, the entire investigation was fractured by infighting and prematurely shuttered by a public exoneration based on controversial evidence. These 5 failures did more than just hinder the investigation. They guaranteed its failure. They created so much doubt and so many unanswered questions that a conviction against anyone became nearly impossible. Today, the DNA of an unknown male remains in a federal database, a chilling reminder of a ghost who walked out of that Boulder home and was never caught. This case was not lost to a brilliant criminal mastermind. It was lost to a series of unforgivable, all too human mistakes. Justice for JonBenet was not stolen. It was thrown away, and for that, there is no exoneration.